educating ourselves and talking to other folks. I think there's a particular responsibility of white people and cis folks to be talking about these injustices to other people like us, and really raising awareness and really pointing out the injustice.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Nick, I don't know if you want to jump in on that question that I kind of posed to the two of you over email about the oppression and inequality in the prison industrial complex and how it's all kind of wrapped into one, and how we kind of have to deal with both, I guess, to deal with the other, and at the same time, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to echo a little bit of what's already been said, and I think as a white person, as a masculine person, it is important to be led by people who have actually experienced incarceration, especially trans women of color, that the networks and the systems and ideas that they come up with are the ones that are most likely going to be the ones that bring about justice and bring about a change. And so it's very important to be led by those voices. It's also really important not to be petrified by this because it isn't helpful. I think especially as if any of the listeners are also white masculine people, it's not helpful for white masculine people to be like, well, what can I do? I can't do anything.
Right.
Look around you. There are lots of organizations that are headed by trans women of color who are formerly incarcerated or formerly incarcerated people of color in general, and they have some great ideas and they have some great projects, and there's a way that you can plug in and be involved in those projects, like the Transgender Gender Variant Intersex Justice Project in the Bay Area, led by Miss Major, is one of the most amazing organizations out there. And if you just go to their website, if you read their publications, there are definitely amazing ways to help and to support through there. I also think that there are some programs that are beginning that, they're not perfect, and I think that a lot of us who are working with them are trying to figure out ways to hold them accountable to this, not creating a hierarchy of who is the deserving prisoner or who is the deserving person who's been profiled. But things like the Vera Institute in New York City works with young people who have misdemeanor charges to create restorative justice programs with them so that they do not go into the juvenile justice system. So it means that, if somebody, if a young person took someone else's wallet, that it then becomes the young person and the person whose wallet was stolen sitting down together and having a discussion and, having those kinds of emotional healings as opposed to sending someone to prison, which is not going to have any emotional justice and also isn't going to make the person whose wallet was stolen feel any better either. So there's some programs like that starting that, like I said, I think a lot of us who want to make sure that we don't create a more tightened criminal justice system or a hierarchical system, or I think we're trying to make sure that we expand and we don't create these hierarchies, but there's still good models to be looking at least, what are alternatives. And I think it's really important as well when we talk about abolition. I mean, yes, absolutely, we overly criminalize the majority of behavior, and this whole broken windows policing thing is a prime example of that. But also, there is sort of a dichotomy in a lot of, in particular, I think a lot of people who don't have interactions with the criminal justice system on a daily basis, white people, people with class privilege, that we might view it as being that there are victims and there are survivors of crimes. But actually most people who are incarcerated for committing a crime are also people who have survived a crime as well. And so this idea that there's the crime victims board or there's the crime victims, most people of color, most low-income people, most people who are in prison in the United States are also survivors of some kind of violence against them. And so we need to get rid of this dichotomy and this idea that there's that we can identify people as being good or bad, or that we can identify people as being deserving or undeserving. And once we shift a lot of thinking around that, we can see a shift in how we also just treat people in terms of justice.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I kind of wanted to ask each of you that, I don't know, it's going to be an interesting question because of the context of our country. But, are there other countries or regions that are using these tactics or have have embraced this prison abolition, this idea. Like, are there people that are using these tactics and are they working? But in asking that, I obviously you have to acknowledge that how many other countries are like the United States, right? Like, look, racism happens in lots of different contexts, but the way that we have our economy and our capitalism and our view of handguns as a country and we just set ourselves aside so much from other countries that I even wonder, like, how much does looking at other countries, is that going to change things, right? Because you can say, oh, well, this country over here totally abolished their prison system, or they totally changed this, that, and the other, but they might not have the same type of systems of oppression and white supremacy that we have in the United States. They might, but they might not, right? So in asking that question, I am acknowledging that, but I still want to ask the question, do either of you know of other regions of the world, other countries that have embraced some of these alternative tactics that are working for them? Or maybe in some countries it was a failure, like whatever the case may be. Not a no on both.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm no expert in this, and something that is really inspiring to me and really just logical is actually looking at some of the practices for justice in indigenous communities.
Yeah.
I think I spent a little bit of time in Chiapas, Mexico, and talking with folks in the Zapatista movement about how they deal with this within their own community. And I would say there's some similar, not same, but similar race dynamics with indigenous folks in Mexico as there is in the United States, where the state has taken their land and resources. So they're, there's folks who have really barred the state from their communities to protect themselves. And
right.
I think this, Mick kind of mentioned a process like this is this restorative justice kind of model where it's really about reconciling conflict and humanizing one another.
Right.
I hear a lot of practices like that where, both parties involved or all parties involved sit and really, surrounded by community and discuss what happened and really get to the bottom of it and, decide together what the response should be.
Right. Mick, do you have anything to add to that? Other cultures that you've observed or studies that you've seen where this has worked in other places?
Well, I think, there are, just in general, and you opened the show with this, any other country in the world doesn't incarcerate the way that the United States does. And so you can look to almost any other country to just see an idea of what maybe the amount of criminalized activity that we have and the amount of activity that we could stop criminalizing people for engaging in. And I know that, both the United Kingdom and Norway have severely dropped their amounts of time that they put people into solitary confinement, and that's been a model that some prisoner justice, prisoner abolitionist people have used in the United States, and some of their rallying and some of their organizing have looked to those models. But I do think it's important to remember that, the reason that the United States system of law looks the way it is because of white supremacy and because of who exercises control and who has control of the law and for whom the law is seen as a tool. And so
right.
We have a bunch of community courts in New York City which are supposed to operate in these models where they sort of are supposed to emulate restorative justice in many ways. That if, for instance, if you are arrested on a charge of engaging in sex work, that you don't go to prison, you go to a class where you have to learn how to use a computer, and you go to class and and the class is purposely taught very, very early in the morning because it helps. The idea being that then people can't work late at night if that's how they have been doing sex work, and it's so punitive and it's so presumptive about what is appropriate for people to be doing.
Right.
And so I get slightly nervous about some of those kinds of ideas that might be rehabilitative, because if it's still the same people making these decisions about like how we're having these discussions and what justice looks like, then it's just going to replicate itself in a different way, much in the way that like the prison system is absolutely something that came out of the Jim Crow laws, which came out of slavery, you know.
Right. It's all the same. It's all the same value set. And
exactly.
So the same value set is making those different judgments. I totally agree. I gotta say, I say this on almost every show. I could talk about this forever, and I really, really appreciate you guys joining us. But one of the things that I want to do before we go is I want to give you guys a chance. You guys have mentioned several organizations or several different things. I want to give each of you a chance to kind of, give your plugs, or maybe let our listeners know how they can reach out to you, or if you're speaking at any conferences or whatever is on the horizon. So Reese, what would you like to plug? The moment is yours. Please tell our listeners whatever you would like them to know.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I just wanted to add another organization that's doing incredible work and that you should go check out and make donations to is the Trans Women of Color Collective.
Absolutely agree.
And then also, for folks who feel kind of debilitated by how big this injustice is, or you're really wondering what your role is, my colleague Timothy wrote a really wonderful article that you can find on BelieveOutLoud.com called "Why Black Men Must Show Up for Trans Women of Color." And I think it's a really great read. It's very heartfelt, and I think that we can kind of apply parallels to how we use our privilege to support trans women of color in our community and follow their leadership and their vision. And if you want to be in touch with me, you can reach out to me on Facebook, Reese Rastian. And thank you so much for having me on the show, Eli.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. Mick, anything that you would like to plug or let our guests know?
I guess I've already mentioned a couple of great organizations, and I'll just say them again. The Transgender, Gender Variant, Intersex Justice Project in California is amazing. Black and Pink and Prisoner Correspondence Project are both amazing volunteer-run organizations that pair LGBT individuals who are incarcerated with a pen pal. Definitely being a pen pal is not for everyone because it's a lot of emotional work and you have to really be consistent and present in someone's life. But it breaks those solitary walls, it breaks the barriers. It's a really important way to engage. And then the work of Sylvia Rivera Law Project, where I'm really blessed to work, is pretty amazing as well.
Awesome. I want to thank you both again for so much for taking the time out to kind of go through this. It's a very emotional subject, particularly I'm sure when you're working in it quite a bit. So I want to thank you for taking the time to share your insights and your wisdom with our listeners and with me. And for those of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us again. We will be back again next month with a wonderful topic. Until then, be strong and take care of each other. And thank you again for joining us. Everybody, have a great month. Bye-bye.